Hi, my name is Rick Rose. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a certified addictions counselor. I'm a parishioner at St. Pat's, and I'm the parent of 4 children. One is a sophomore at Trinity, and 3, I have an 8th grader, a 3rd grader, and a 1st grader, all at St. Pat's. I want to talk to you today about an issue that both Father Don Benner and I feel strongly about. The goal is to both raise awareness within the community and also to equip parents to deal with this issue. The issue is twofold. The first part of it has to do with our overall use of screens, which has gone up significantly since the coronavirus hit. And so many children are spending so much time online, both for school and also for social reasons. And because of that, the access to pornography has also risen quite a lot. I will be talking about it directly and frankly in this talk. It's not graphic. It is appropriate for middle schoolers, but I want you to be aware that it is one of the primary topics that will be addressed. And again, the goal is to both raise your awareness of the issue and to equip you to begin having a conversation with your child about how to manage it. Let me begin with a quick prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here with us, that you see us, that you hear us. We ask your pardon for our sins and your grace to make this time of reflection fruitful. Mary, our Mother, all the angels and saints, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Let's get started. So, in this talk, I don't want to take a fear-based strategy. What I really want to do is I want to help you and your child understand a little bit about how the brain works. So there's essentially 2 parts of the brain that we need to know about. The first is the frontal lobe and the cerebral cortex, so kind of the top part and the front part of the brain, which tonight I'm going to call the rational brain. The other part is the lower part of the brain called the limbic system. And that part of the brain for this evening, or for this talk, I'm going to refer to as the lizard brain. And the reason we do that is because the lizard has only that part of the brain. Now, the rational brain is very beautiful. It's what allows us to think in the abstract. It's what allows us to solve complex, complicated problems. It allows us to think into the future. And it really allows us to organize and prioritize information. It likes to gather information from a lot of different sources and use that information to try to make a rational decision, hence we call it the rational brain, in a given situation. Now, the lizard brain is also kind of beautiful in its own way, but it's very different. The lizard brain is very concrete. It's really interested in just whatever it is going on right now in my life. It doesn't think too far into the future, very short term, just very basic. It really wants to answer one question. Actually, this is the best way to understand the lizard brain. It's constantly asking itself, am I safe? And so its job, again, in a kind of a beautiful way, is to keep me alive and keep me safe. The lizard brain thrives on predictability. If X happens and then Y and Z follow, the lizard brain likes when X happens because it knows that Y and Z are coming. And so it can relax for that period of time and doesn't have to worry about too much. So it really creates these associations and likes when it knows what's coming. As long as everything is safe in my environment, the lizard brain is going to allow my rational brain to do my rational brain thing, make the decisions. But as soon as something feels a little off, the lizard brain is going to take over and start making decisions. Here's some examples of the way these 2 parts of the brain work together. If I ask you what 8 times 8 is, you're going to tell me 64. If I ask you what 9 times 9 is, you're going to tell me 81. If I ask you what 13 times 13 is, you're not going to know the answer. You're going to have to turn on the cranks of your brain and figure it out. What's happening here is that you have stored, if you're anything like me, you've stored the times tables up to about 12s, which you learned probably in 2nd or 3rd grade, and you still hold them in your lizard brain. Your lizard brain kind of holds that data that you know, and that frees up your rational brain to do other more important things. So that's kind of an example of the way these 2 parts of the brain work. Another good example is driving. Right? So when I get into the car, I slide into the driver's seat, I throw the key in the ignition, turn on the windshield wipers, turn on the lights, adjust my seat, adjust my mirrors, and I'm doing all of this in the span of about 10 or 15 seconds. It does not take long at all. And I'm doing all of it with almost no rational brain activity. It's all stored in the lizard brain because I've done it so many times. My son is a sophomore at Trinity, and he just started driving. And for him, the experience is very, very different. He gets into the driver's seat. He takes a minute to try to find where the key goes into the ignition. He takes about 10 or 20 seconds to adjust each mirror. We haven't even started the car yet, and it's already been a good minute and a half or 2 minutes just of him trying to figure out where the knobs and the things are. None of it is stored in his lizard brain. It takes all of it. It takes rational brain activity, and it's just mental effort for him, mental energy. So, that's a good example of kind of how these two parts of the brain work together. Now, there are a couple of ways in which the parts of our brain don't work together too well, and we're going to look at some examples of that in just a moment. Before we do that, it's really important for us to understand that there are two types of pleasure. So the first type of pleasure has to do with the rational brain. It kind of mirrors the way the rational brain works. Think of studying for an exam over a long period of time and then doing well on that exam. That's just a gratifying feeling. Or think about learning a new instrument or a new language. And sometimes in the moment, it doesn't always feel like we're making progress. But at some point, we see that, we can play a chord that we couldn't play before, or we can say something in the language that we've been studying that we couldn't say before. And that's a gratifying feeling. It's very satisfying. Or maybe we enjoy a good meal with family and friends. So there's a relational type of pleasure that can take place over a longer period of time as we develop these relationships and we enter deeper into friendships. The lizard brain, on the other hand, experiences pleasure very differently than that. The lizard brain likes anything that goes pop. So when I say pop, what I'm referring to is a surge of chemicals, a surge of dopamine in particular. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that gets released into my brain that's strongly correlated with pleasure. So when I eat a big piece of cake that's got a lot of good sugar in it, or I drink a nice big soda, that sugar goes into my body and it actually facilitates the release of this chemical called dopamine. And it feels great. That's why I like it. That's why I enjoy it. Salty foods, fatty foods, sugary foods, they all elicit this dopamine response. Again, what I call the pop. Alcohol and drugs. Those are things that people seek out because they give us a strong pop. Cocaine in particular and stimulants have give people a strong experience of this type of pleasure. Roller coasters is another one. Anything that kind of gets my adrenaline going will also come with this pop. So these are two different kinds of pleasure, and it's going to be important to remember those as we move forward. So before I move on, I want to give one more example of some ways that my brain does not always, the rational brain and the lizard brain don't always work together. Now that you know this information, I want you to remember one more example. So anytime anybody that you care about says something to you, and your response is, "Oh, here we go again," or "I've heard this before," you now know that you are thinking with your lizard brain. Your lizard brain is hearing what's coming out of this person's mouth, and it's judging that there's something unsafe about it. It's already anticipating what's coming, and it doesn't like it. It's getting ready to defend itself, maybe to have an argument to show why the lizard brain is right and this other person is wrong. Or maybe it's getting ready to get the heck out of there, so it goes to the other room, or it picks up the phone and starts playing a game just so it doesn't have to engage in the conversation. It's a fight or flight response. And when you say that to yourself, there's another example. You always say that, or you always do this, or you never do this. These are all lizard brain examples of the way that the lizard brain thinks. So, if you can, it's not a great idea to live in that space, and it's a good idea to try to think a little differently about how you're going to deal with that. So this is an example, what I just gave you is an example of a way in which the lizard brain and the rational brain don't work together that well. The lizard brain can get mixed up with some of these things. It gets confused, and it starts to take over the decision-making process. It takes over my brain, and I stop thinking with my rational brain, and I'm now just thinking with my lizard brain. Now, this is true in the example I gave you. It's also true with other issues. And now I want to get into the issue of pornography, because this is just such a good example of a way that our lizard brain takes over. I'll talk about that in a moment, but first I want to give you some statistics. Again, I want to repeat, the idea behind these is not to scare anybody, but they are pretty eyebrow-raising, some of these statistics. So in one study from 2016, 48% of 11 to 16-year-olds had viewed pornography. 11 to 16 is a pretty big range. I mean, I think we all know that an 11-year-old is pretty different than a 16-year-old. But that overall number of half of those kids that age have viewed pornography, that's pretty alarming. I think even more alarming is the next one. 93% of boys and 62% of girls had been exposed to online pornography prior to age 18. I mean, that's pretty darn close to 100% of boys. So if you're thinking to yourself that you doubt that your son or daughter who is in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade is going to be exposed to pornography, I think that these studies would suggest that the chance of that happening is actually quite high, probably higher than you think. Here's another, this was, quote, definitely caught my eye. Many adolescents who view pornography initially feel shame, diminished self-confidence, and sexual uncertainty, but these feelings quickly shift to unadulterated enjoyment with regular viewing. Now, if you think about what we just learned about the brain, this starts to make some sense. In this same study, kids who had been exposed to pornography reported feeling some very strange feelings initially. They felt nauseous, sometimes like they wanted to throw up. There was this kind of restless agitation, sometimes guilt and shame, right? So they reported these really unpleasant feelings. But those feelings quickly shifted to this unadulterated pleasure and enjoyment. And when you understand that that process was essentially their lizard brain taking over the decision making because it really enjoyed that surge of dopamine that came with that, even though there were some initial unpleasant feelings, now you start to understand how kids and young men and women and even adults get caught into the cycle of pornography. Here's another interesting statistic. So over on the left side here, we have percentage of kids. And down on the bottom here, we have their ages, right? So you can see these numbers here. So by the age of 8, more than 1 in 10 kids owning smartphones. So this is all kids who, quote, own a smartphone. So in other words, they have a smartphone in their possession basically most of the time or all of the time. For 8-year-olds who own a smartphone, 1 in 10 of them had been exposed to sexting. So this actually isn't pornography. This is just texts that involve sexually explicit language or images or videos. That's 8 years old that 1 in 10 of those kids had been exposed. Again, this is kids owning cell phones. By the age of 13, 37.2%, more than a third of children owning smartphones, will be exposed to sexting. Now, my daughter is 13. I would say the vast majority of her friends have their own cell phone. So when you think of about a third of children who own their own cell phone have been exposed to sexting, I haven't been given any reason that the St. Patrick's community is immune from this type of situation. I think that our community is probably just like, in some ways, just like a bunch of other communities. I think we're a very special community. I love being a part of it, but children are children and phones are phones. Another issue that happened in this study is that actually girls reported earlier exposure to sexting than boys. And the reason for that primarily was that usually if they knew an older boy, that boy was soliciting them for images. So through text, they would be solicited for these images. So that's also a very scary thought, that actually in some ways girls are being exposed earlier to some of this than boys, just very differently. Now, when you understand the way that the brain works, I have some friends who have said things to me like, or people I work with in my practice as a social worker, and they'll say things like, my child wouldn't do this. He or she is a good kid, so I don't think he or she would get into this. And what I try to tell people is, your child is a good kid, and he or she would do this. So when you understand the way the brain works, you understand that it has nothing to do with whether the child wants to be a moral kid or not. Most kids do have a drive to be virtuous and moral. But the issue is that at certain ages, the lizard brain simply takes over. It takes over the decision making, it takes over the process of how we experience pleasure, and it happens whether we like it or not. The reason I put this slide on here is simply so that you can see that there are cycles that come with this once it gets started. Remember how that it switched from kind of uncomfortable feelings to unadulterated enjoyment? Well, once that happens, I start to see cycles, right? Even when I don't want to, I start to become preoccupied with it. I start to think about it a lot. I start to create rituals around it. When I say rituals, what I mean is just predictable patterns, right? So I can start to see predictable patterns around the behavior. I visit certain websites, and those websites get more and more explicit. And the way the times and the way I view pornography gets more and more in terms of frequency and quantity. It grows and it gets a little bit stronger. And then I fall. I realize, like, hey, this isn't working, and I do something that is clearly against what I want. And then I feel despair, and I feel often shame and guilt with that. And if I'm not careful and I don't pay attention to the way the brain works, I'm actually just going to fall right back into the cycle of preoccupation. And again, this is a lizard brain based pattern. The lizard brain takes over and starts to run the show. Now, it's not just pornography that our lizard brain takes over with. In this day and age of screens, screen use itself can become an issue. So from a 2019 Common Sense Media survey, Common Sense Media is a good website. I highly recommend it. Cell phone ownership in 2019 was 36% of 10-year-olds, almost 70% of 12-year-olds, and 81% of 14-year-olds. So if you kind of remember some of those numbers, about a third of 13-year-olds had been exposed to sexting of those who own cell phones. Well, this is showing us that about 70 or 80% of 13-year-olds own cell phones. So again, that number is very high. Non-homework screen time, 4.75 hours per day for tweens, 7.25 hours a day for teens. At first, I was kind of like, that can't be possible. But the more I thought about it and the more I started to observe the behavior of my own kids and of their friends, I started to realize that not only is it possible, but actually that's happening even in my own home sometimes. And so, you know, that's just a huge portion of our kids' lives, is being on screens. For tweens, for 10 to 12-year-olds, YouTube is the most dominant form of interaction with screens. And for teenagers, it's more social media, so Snapchat, Instagram, things like that. It's not just the young adults. A Highlights magazine survey said that 68% of kids said their parents were distracted and didn't have enough time for family, and the primary reason they cited was the parents' cell phone use. So it's important to remember that we're as susceptible to it as anyone else. In fact, the people who make these apps, the people who make these cell phones, these tablets, the apps that go on them, they hire neuroscientists. They hire people who understand how the brain works on a much deeper level than I do. And they specifically try to create situations where they're going to keep eyes on the screen for as long as possible. And as soon as the person averts their eyes from the screen, they're going to try to find a reason to get their eyes back on the screen. And they have this as an explicit goal, getting screen time higher and higher. Here's an interesting correlation here. So what we have is life satisfaction and happiness on the left side. And on the bottom, we have social media time. So for an otherwise happy child, this is mostly teens, this was for teens, about 1 hour a day of social media time actually doesn't seem to affect them that much. It seems to be fairly innocuous. It doesn't seem to affect their mental health. But once you get past 1 hour, so up into the 2 hour, the 3 hour range, now we start to see a correlation with kids who have poorer grades, fewer healthier activities, fewer face-to-face interactions with friends their age. And when we get to about 5 hours, now we start to see people with serious mental health problems. So this is when you start to see real clinical levels of depression and anxiety, maybe self-cutting, maybe some suicidal thoughts. This correlation here is laid out in this magazine article called The Atlantic. It's theatlantic.com. It's online. You can access it for free. It's a great article. I recommend you check it out. I want to do a quick exercise here because what we're asking both parents and children to do in this time of coronavirus is something that, when you understand the brain, takes on new meaning and new significance. So I want you to think for a moment about how you use your computer, your laptop at home. So you probably open it up and there's maybe a predictable pattern. You probably go to the same websites and you might even visit them in the same order, right? So the question is, what is your association with that device? What is your association with that laptop, your strongest association? So I know for me, it's my email. So I open it up and I go to my email, and that's usually the first thing I do. And then sometimes I'll visit maybe a sports-related website or a news-related website. And so I start to create these associations. Even if I go onto my computer to do some other activity, like find a recipe or something, I often find myself first going to my email because that's my strongest association. And sometimes I'll even forget why I went on there in the first place. I get caught in the rabbit hole of whatever that lizard brain has associated with that device. So maybe it's work for some people, maybe it's Facebook. Now think about your child and think about what he or she associates with that device. Probably games to a certain degree, maybe social media. Think about your cell phone, right? Same thing. What's the associations? What do you most strongly link to that device? And then your tablet. So these associations probably vary from device to device. Here's one thing that we know that kids don't associate with these devices: schoolwork. What we're asking kids to do in this time of coronavirus is we're asking them to literally rewire their lizard brain, to rewire the associations they have with these devices so that they can concentrate on schoolwork. And when you understand what we're asking of them, it takes on new significance, it takes on new meaning, and it's difficult. So I have some ideas about how we can help our kids to thrive with online learning in particular, but also just homework in general, so that we can kind of help them understand how their brain works, help them understand what they can do to help their lizard brain feel more comfortable and more focused. So let's get into what to do about it. So first I want to talk quickly about pornography. So the very first thing that I strongly encourage you to do as parents is to be the first person to talk to them about this issue. Watching this video with them is a really good place to start. So I'm doing some of the speaking for you, and now you can build on the conversation. One of the reasons we want to do this is because, as you remember, and as I have emphasized, when kids are first exposed to pornography, they usually have really mixed up emotions, mixed feelings. And if we haven't talked to them about it, they're kind of left to their own devices to figure it out. And guess who's going to win that kind of battle? The lizard brain is going to win that battle. So our job as parents is to give them voice for their rational brain. And I'll talk more about how to do that in just a moment. Monitor. So imagine that your house is your fortress. You wouldn't allow people who are overtly sinning in really egregious ways to walk into your home and to do some really nasty things in front of your children. So why would you allow that type of thing to enter your home in other ways? So I'm not a big fan of helicopter parenting. In fact, I strongly encourage the opposite. I think kids need to be able to fail. They need to be able to fall down and scrape their knee. They need to be able to have the freedom to not do something right so that they can learn how to do it better. That's how kids learn. On the other hand, we also have to protect them. And in this case, I would say keeping your home sanctified, keeping it safe from this type of thing is really important. So there's a lot of software out there. Covenant Eyes is probably the most well-known and biggest. Jiminy is a website that has a lot. I used one of their studies earlier. A lot of information and software as well for those of you who want to learn more about that. There are so many software programs out there that I'm not going to sift through all of them for you, but you can look best ways to block porn and figure out what works best for you. If you're really not ready to spend money yet, I also have included this link here that will help you understand how to use your router information to really take a good look at every website that people in your house have visited. Some adults might actually be feeling a little uncomfortable about that because, let's face it, we are susceptible to these compulsive type tendencies. We all have lizard brains as well. So finally, give kids in particular a clear and direct strategy. This is particularly helpful for younger kids, so I would say anywhere from 3rd to 5th or 6th grade. I stole this from a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I got it from Father Don, actually. We use the acronym CAN DO. C, close my eyes when I come across pictures that I know I shouldn't be seeing, or images, videos that I shouldn't be seeing. A, always tell a trusted adult. N, name it. That is pornography and it is wrong. D, distract myself with something different. So close the computer, go do something else for a while. And O, order my rational brain to be the boss. So you're literally giving voice to your rational brain. Saying it out loud actually helps because it engages another part of your brain. Telling a trusted adult, that's why you want to be the first one to talk to him or her. If they have mixed up feelings and they're concerned that they're going to get in trouble if they say, hey, I came across an image or a picture, they're very much not likely to come to you. If they understand that you understand, then they are likely to come talk to you about it. And then you can have a productive conversation about how to keep this out of your home and out of your life. Now I want to turn my attention to online learning and screens in general. So first of all, let's help the lizard brain predict what's going to happen. So we can do that by creating a separate space for homework or for online learning. We can also try to use a separate device. Now, the one benefit of having a Chromebook for every student at St. Pat's is that this device can be used specifically for schoolwork. And you can say no games on this. We are not playing games. And actually, we're really not doing anything. We're not surfing the internet. We're not doing anything other than doing games. We're not going to watch YouTube videos. I'm sorry, we're just going to do schoolwork. Look, I mixed myself up. Finally, set aside specific times for schoolwork. So think about what we're doing. Remember how the lizard brain thrives on predictability. It thrives on when it knows what's coming. When you create a separate space and use a separate device and have a separate time specifically for this work, the lizard brain starts to understand what is being asked of it. It can start to relax and lean into the work. No cell phone use. Get that cell phone out of there when it's time for work. Now, I want to say something. I do understand that not everyone has the same level of means, right? Not everyone has space in their home for a separate workspace, or we have 4 kids in our house. Not every kid is going to have the same access to workspaces. I'm not saying you have to do all of these. I'm just trying to give you some ideas about how you can prepare the lizard brain and prepare the way for it to be at its optimal functioning. Secondly, use paper and pencil whenever possible. Why do I say that? I say that because when you actually have something that involves touch, right? So something tactile, it really engages different parts of the brain. So when you're reading a book instead of reading a screen, it actually engages the brain in a slightly different way. When you're writing something on paper instead of typing it, it actually does engage the brain in a different type of way. It's actually a slower process and things get kind of coded differently. And there's some evidence that the learning and the memory is actually better with pen and paper versus on the computer. Now, that's not possible in every scenario, but I'm just saying whenever it is possible, try to do that. And if you're a teacher at St. Pat's and you're watching this, I strongly encourage you to try to maintain some level of hands-on pen and paper, hardback, hardcover books, actual physical books in your curriculum. If you can do that, I strongly recommend that. And finally, within your family, I strongly encourage you to reconnect with your family. Have no electronics periods where you just sit down, you play a board game, you take up a new hobby. Maybe you kind of try to all share a hobby. Maybe you even paint the same picture. There's some cool things in town where you can go and there's some art classes and things like that. A lot of interesting stuff around here that you can do that does not involve electronics, where you and your family can just put that stuff aside for a while. There's a recent study where board games were highly correlated with family happiness and satisfaction. So if you haven't busted out a board game in a while, I encourage you to do that, or a puzzle. Oh, here's my little attempt at humor. This is the most boring slide award. I didn't do anything special on this one. So that's pretty much the end of my talk. Here's my information. This is my email. So you're welcome to email me if you have any questions or concerns. I also have some resources here. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you're welcome to check out these resources. You can pause the video and maybe kind of look at those, use some of those links if you want to, check out some of those books. A lot of them I used to create this talk. A lot of them I have used in my own personal life. So let me just pause here and summarize. In summary, I just want to say that Father Don and I very much care about the mental health of this community and about the spiritual health of this community. And pornography and screen time in general touches on both of those topics in a very meaningful way. We have the sacraments, especially confession. I strongly encourage you to utilize the sacrament of confession to help break that cycle that we looked at earlier. And try to foster the lizard brain with healthier activities such as prayer time, other things of that nature that really feed your body and your soul. The lizard brain thrives on predictability. Well, we can give it predictability in either helpful ways or harmful ways, and I encourage you to do it in helpful and virtuous ways. I hope you found this talk helpful. If you have any questions, reach out to me via email, or you can get my information through Father Don if you need it. I look forward to hearing thoughts and hoping this conversation moves forward with you. And God bless and good evening.